Welcome back to the KIX 96.5 Morning Show. We love showcasing indie artists, and this morning we're heading to Texas to chat with Nashville recording artist Sonny Morgan. Sonny's been musical his whole life, but it took a famous country singer to challenge him to pursue his passion for singing. His brand new single, Lonely Star State, is out now. We're excited to have Sonny on the show. First, Sonny, thanks for coming on.
Well, certainly. I love it, man. Sure do.
Well, you were born and raised in Texas. You've always been a music fan.
Right.
I played trumpet when I was growing up. You played trumpet. Let's focus on the trumpet for just a second. Okay. How did you get going? Who influenced you to play trumpet?
Well, it's kind of a funny deal. I wanted to play piano. My dad says, you can't carry a piano around with you, son, so you need to play something. So he said, how about a trumpet? So I was about 10 years old. I think it was about fourth or fifth grade, something like that. And there was a little band that they had at this little elementary school I went to. And this band director taught me how to play the trumpet, taught me how to read music. And I played that thing all the way up through high school and was in the marching band in high school and the symphony band in high school and all that good stuff. And I tell you, I really enjoyed it. And I've used it. The only time except for the fact is that I've learned music and I learned how to read music and all. Later in life, and this was a past life, I happened to meet the guy that owned Geico Insurance, which he's passed away since, but he invited me to his home, and it was a business thing. I went to his house, and he happened to be an art collector. His house looked like a museum. It was in outside of Washington, D.C., and it looked like an art museum. Walked in, there was he had Picassos and Monets and all hanging on the walls, and he had this beautiful piano there, and I said and he had a candelabra on it, and I said, and he had told me he collected all this art, and I said, tell me you didn't get this from Liberace, and he said, that's Liberace's old piano and his candelabra, and I said, really? And I happened just out of the corner of my eye on a stand next to the piano was a trumpet, and I said, tell me a little bit about that trumpet. I'm a trumpet player. He says, you play the trumpet? And he went over and grabbed it and handed it to me. He says, take a look at it. And it had this beautiful filigree on the bell of it, and it said Louis Armstrong on it. He began to tell me that it was the last trumpet that Louis Armstrong played before he passed away, and he ended up picking that thing up, and he said, you know how to play it? And I said, heck, yeah. And I said, I tell you what would be appropriate? I said, let's play Hello Dolly. And I played Hello Dolly on that trumpet at this guy's house in Washington, D.C. And literally, not shortly after that, he passed away, and that trumpet was donated to the Smithsonian. So I guess I'm the last guy that blew air through that thing. So,
cool.
It was a great trumpet story. I mean, if you could come up with trumpet stories.
Yeah, that's a good one.
One of those deals. But you being a trumpet player probably can appreciate that one.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, your life went on a different path for music for quite a while. You were a car salesman.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I ended up, my dad was a Dodge dealer in Dallas all my growing up years. And, of course, I've worked there every day. I'd come home after school. Instead of going to ride my bike with the kids, I'd go to work at the dealership. He'd bring me home after the place closed every night. And but I worked not only just selling cars, but I've worked in all the departments, service and parts and all that. When I graduated from high school, Chrysler, the whole car market was just, or when I was in college, the whole car market was upside down. There were gas lines and everything else, and he ended up luckily selling the place, getting his money out of it, which a lot of these dealers were just losing their back in those days. And anyway, I had to go out and do something, so I graduated from Northwood University. We ended up going to work for a car dealership in town. From there on out, I said, my dream would be to, own a dealership, because that was my plan. He was going to turn the dealership over to me, and, I'd live happily ever after, all that good stuff. So anyway, that didn't happen, but I ended up building 8 dealerships from scratch and very successful in that endeavor. And that's where the music comes. It was kind of a funny deal over the years. I was fortunate to meet a lot of really cool people. Charlie Pride was one of them, and I sold him probably 10 or 15. I was in the Cadillac business and sold him 10 or 15 or so Cadillacs, and we became real close buddies. He lived only real close to the dealership, and heck, there probably wasn't a week go by that I didn't go over his house to sit around and listen to some of his stories and talk about things and selling cars. And his wife, she drove the cars I sold. Her name was Rosine, and she was just a sweetheart lady. I sold him, and he referred me to a bunch of people. He gave me Willie Nelson called me one day and wanted to buy a Cadillac. I sold him one, and just on and on and on. Tom Landry with Cowboys, I sold him probably 15 cars, and it just kind of started mushrooming that way.
Wow.
Over the speeding up the clock a little bit, and this is where you came in and talked about how the person indirectly got me into this thing. But I opened up a Bentley, Rolls-Royce, Aston Martin, Lotus dealership down in Austin, Texas, and we moved down from Dallas down there and built this thing from scratch. And I ended up selling a guy by the name of Louis Messina, who is an arena producer, and his biggest client was George Strait. And he said, George has been talking about buying one of these cars. I'll send him over. And I just kind of, you hear people say that.
Oh, yeah, sure you will.
You don't lose a wink. Don't lose a wink of sleep over it. I'll tell you, because as many stories I've heard. I want to send you so and so. But anyway, about 2 weeks later, I get this call. Sonny, it's George Strait, that kind of thing. And
yeah.
I went out and look at a car, and I wasn't actually really a George Strait fan. I was more of my music was a little bit towards Alan Jackson's side of it, and some of those people. And I said, I listen to your music, but I only know of 2 songs that you've done. That's X's and Amarillo by Morning. He said, I got a feeling we'll get along just well, because at that point in time, I wasn't some guy that was going to gaga over all of that stuff that he does.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
That was a really neat deal, and I ended up selling him a Rolls Royce that day. Probably sold him 12 or so cars, Rolls Royces and Bentleys. And the story, and not George can afford anything he wants to, but the thing about it is, when he was a kid growing up, he saw a Rolls Royce one time. He says, I've always wanted one of these things, and that's how it came about. He has the means to do it, and he bought one, that kind of thing. People go, he bought a Rolls Royce, that kind of thing. So what? If you had the money and you want one,
exactly.
Buy it, that kind of thing. Anyway, his influence was tremendous. We got to know each other very well. Matter of fact, there probably wasn't unless he was out of town somewhere, I'd probably talk to him about every other day.
Wow.
I'd go down to his house. He lived not too far from Austin. I'd drive down to his house and we'd sit and talk about things on his back porch, and he and I were hit it off. We had a lot of stuff in common, and it's like his song "Cold Beer Conversation." Just a couple old boys, little time well wasted was the song, one of the song verses.
Yeah,
and that song was written literally on his kitchen table with me sitting there.
Wow.
And so it's one of those things. He was a tremendous influence. I got into his music pretty well. Loved his music, but better than loving his music, I loved his business model. Being the business as long as I have, and the car business is a very intricate business to be in if you own dealerships, because it has all these little things that you have to keep, all these plates you have to keep juggling up in the air all at one time. And George Strait's business was kind of that way. It's very intricate, and we got into a lot of detail about how our business is literally. You don't think of George Strait as a business, but he is. That's a business. And so basically, there was a lot of parallelisms between my dealership that I was running and his music business he was running. So that's where we had a lot in common from that.
Are you still friends with him?
I'll tell you a little story when I get to here in a minute. But I met a guy in a long story. I was introduced to a guy by the name of Ray Benson, asleep at the wheel.
Yeah.
And Ray was the real guy that really was the boot that kicked me over the fence. And I'll tell you, I got to know him pretty well. And I called him one day and I said, I know you're going to be doing this show in a little town called Albert, Texas. There's a dance hall there with an ice house. Oldest dance hall. You ought to look it up. Oldest dance hall in Texas. Albert, Texas is the name of it. I think they probably have about population of 10. But it's between Johnson City, Fredericksburg, which is off of 190 there. Southwest of Austin. You've heard about, you even know about Fredericksburg and all, I'm sure, and Lukenbach, Texas, and all that stuff. That's right. Anyway, I said, why don't I pick you up in the Bentley? That way you don't have to ride in your old tour bus. And he said, that sounds like a deal. Picked me up at 8:30. So I got up, went and picked him up, and we drove to Albert, Texas. And basically the whole conversation as we were driving was, I really want to get into this thing real heavy now. I've decided I've been doing a little singing on the side at places. Didn't want my employees to know, but I've been singing. I did some voice coaching and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, you were getting ready.
I was telling him, I'm thinking about doing some stuff besides being in the car business. He said, okay. So we go to this show, and about halfway through the show, Sonny Morgan comes to the stage, and I thought, well, he's probably wanting me to get the car ready so we can blast out of there. Because I remember old Charlie Daniels, when I used to see him in concert. He didn't stay around for anything. I mean, he was in his tour bus and gone before I got to my car when I was out in the audience. So I figured, well, maybe he's going to kind of like old Charlie Daniels. That's probably what he wants to do.
Yeah.
So he leans down, and guy's 6'5". He leans down and says, get up here and sing with us if you want to sing. And I said, you're kidding me. He says, you know our music, don't you? And I said, yeah, I know all of your songs. And so we got up there, and I think the first song we sang was Willie's On Your Road Again. And so I harmonized with him on that and a couple other songs. And we finished up with, like he always does, Happy Trails, which is old Roy Rogers song.
Yeah.
And we were just singing perfect harmony together. And he's looking at me, and he puts his hand over the microphone. He says, son, you just don't need to be thinking about it anymore. You just need to do it. That was really, if you want to call it, quote, kicking me over the fence. That's what kicked me over the fence with getting into this thing. And at that particular point in time, I go, well, okay, what do I do? And he suggested that I go in Austin, Texas, there's, gosh, I couldn't tell you how many recording studios
tons
there
of
are down there. I think everybody's got one in their home.
Yeah.
But anyway, went to this guy's house and recorded 7 covers. There were some George Straits and Alan Jacksons, and I did one of Sleep at the Wheel and all that stuff. So it came down to a point to where I knew a guy from way back when. I used to voice auto dealership commercials, and there was a radio station. And if you've been in the radio business any length of time, you probably have known about it or heard about this radio station. It's not in business anymore, but it was called KVIL in Dallas. Probably the biggest. Ron Chapman, probably the biggest radio stations in the world at one time. I used to go down to KVIL and record these
and do your voice tracks. Yeah.
The program director, and he was a producer and all that stuff, kind of all in one. Radio station guys have a bunch of hats they wear. I understand that very well. That's another story got me to Granbury. I worked at a radio station here in Granbury. It's what got me here. I remember this guy saying he was going to move to Nashville. I'm talking 35 years ago or better.
Wow.
And so I said, Chuck Rhodes told me that he was going to Nashville. Do you remember what he was going to do? She said, no, I don't remember. But I looked him up, and lo and behold, he was on Facebook. I sent him an email and said, I got 7 songs. Listen to these songs. Tell me if I need to keep my day job or what. And calls me back, and about an hour and a half later, it says, when can you come meet me? And, kind of the rest is history. I went to Nashville, talked to him, and said, now you're going to have to put some original songs out there. And I said, okay. I don't have a songwriter. And I said, I write songs, but everyone that I've written, that I've shown to people, they say they suck. So it's one of those deals that I've got to either get better or got to find somebody right. And I did find some songwriters, and that's another. I mean, we could talk 3 days over that.
Oh, yeah.
I happened to be in Nashville. I was invited to a party at BMI. I met a guy there. He was sitting there by himself in a chair. Didn't look like he was having a lot of fun. I walked up and I said, "Is that chair taken?" He said, "No, you have a seat." And I said, "But you want a beer?" He said, "No, I'll stick it out." And so I went got me a beer and came back, sat down, and introduced myself to him. And it ended up a guy that was a songwriter for many, Aretha Franklin, the Box Tops. He wrote "I'm Your Puppet." He just a bunch of stuff.
Nice.
He toured with Neil Young for 21 years.
Oh, wow.
In the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and all that stuff. And I said we were here. It was an album release party at BMI, and I said, did you have anything to do with it? He said, I did all the keyboards and wrote about half the songs in the thing. And so I said, what is your name? He said, Spooner Odom. And I said, I know I'm supposed to know that, but I don't. But he said, well, that's okay. And I said, do you ever write any country stuff? And he said, well, I wrote about 30 songs, but I never released any of them to anybody. And I said, well, here's my card and my email address on it. If you ever decide, I'd love to. I'm trying to put an album together, and I don't have enough music on that to write. And about 2 weeks later, his cousin, Mark Namor, sends me all these songs, and I recorded, I think, 4, 5, 6 songs on the first album were theirs. And Mark has ended up being a real good buddy and a great songwriter. And actually, he wrote Lonely Star State along with Valerie Wilson. And he wrote that song he's now writing songs just for me, not just pulling songs out of a book he wrote. So,
nice.
That was how that came about. So I did that first album. It's called It's a Beautiful World. And the first song that was on there was written by the late Daryl Singletary, which was Chuck Rhodes, my manager's in Nashville's. That was his client as well. And there's another big story there. At one time, he was thinking about, we were going on tour or something, and Daryl died before I had a chance to meet him. But anyway, Daryl gave this song to Chuck to give to me, and that song it did real well. It was a big hit, and it's a great song, and it takes me a while to kind of get to a point where I'm ready to sing it, because I think about him more than I do the song.
Yeah.
And it kind of chokes me up, because I really, really do miss the guy. He was a wonderful, wonderful singer and very underrated in the country music business.
Yeah, wow.
So that's kind of how that happened, and we, like I said, we moved from Austin. Austin kind of got, they always say keep Austin weird. Well, Austin got too weird for us. We could live anywhere, and we decided to live about 40 miles southwest of Fort Worth in a little town called Granbury, Texas. And when we moved here, I think the population was about 8 or 9, 10,000 people. Now I think it's about 20, 25,000 since we moved here, and it's getting bigger and bigger. And I think part of it is that it was voted 3 years in a row as the most beautiful historic small town in the United States, and it's a beautiful place, got a lot of history. I love it here. It's a great town. The traffic's getting crazy, and I see a lot of California license plates nowadays.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, I don't know what's going to be left of California. I mean, everybody, even their dogs, moving out of there as fast as they can.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that it's a great little town. It's still a little country town. It's got a beautiful square. One of the songs on the album that we wrote for the album is called "Small Town Big Time." It literally is a song about Granbury, Texas. And if you get a chance, you ought to listen to that one.
Yeah,
too.
I saw it on your Facebook page.
Yeah, it's a great. It talks about the town. I mean, basically, if you were from Granbury, you'd know exactly. You go, he wrote that for this town, that kind of thing. So it turned out good, and I'm very pleased with it. We the second album had a song on it that has been very popular. As a matter of fact, it hit the big chart. When I say the big chart, the one out of Nashville that all the big guns are on, the Blake Sheltons, Keith Urbans, and all those guys, Carrie Underwood, and all. And it's called John Deere Steering Wheel. That song went to like 32 on the terrestrial big chart that they have out of.
Really?
Yeah. So I was very happy with that. I couldn't believe how much that song lasted. Well, it came out back in, I think I came out with that song in 18, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it just kind of slowly but surely kind of dropped off the chart, but it was on there for a year or so.
Wow.
And that's another one. And we wrote that song, basically, it's a kind of a satirical song about a guy that can't see his girlfriend enough because she's too busy driving her John Deere tractor. And so, I can relate to that a little bit with like my wife and some of the cars that
exactly.
we bought, and she won't get out of the car long enough to fix me dinner or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's a great song, and it's got a great story. But more so, what we wrote it for was we wrote it kind of when I first talked about it, I said, remember the Fabulous Thunderbirds, and they did a real big song. I can't think of what it's called now, but anyway, they wrote a song, and I liked that drive. It had a lot of drive in it. And also remember the old Boot Scootin' Boogie that originally came out by the Sleep of the Wheel, and then, of course, Brooks and Dunn picked it up.
Yeah.
I wanted a song that you could choreograph. Ain't It Tough Enough?
Tough Enough's Fabulous Thunderbirds.
Yeah. And so anyway, I wanted it kind of with that drive, and I wanted it with basically a song that we can choreograph a dance, a line dance to, just like Boot Scootin' Boogie.
Yeah.
That's how it came out, and I encourage you to listen to that song. It's a fun one. And I still had got a if anybody's listening on your show, have them call me. I'm looking for a choreographer to do a video on that thing.
Yeah, get a line dance.
Yeah, it's going to be. I mean, when it happens, whoever listens to it, that's a choreographer, it'll automatically hit them, and they'll know what to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a song.
Wow.
But that's how. In Lonely Star State, it's kind of the same way as Big Town, Small Town, Big Time. It was written literally. We sat down. What we do is Mark Namore and Valerie Wilson wrote this song. They both live in Mosul Shoals, and along with Spooner Odom and all those guys. And I said, "Look, guys, what I'd like to have is a song about a guy that they're all, most of the country songs are either girls coming back to him or girls going away from him, that kind of thing. So this one happened to be he's lost his girlfriend, and he really can't think of words to replace her and all that kind of stuff, and he wants her back, and he's just lonely. And it's a play off of the Lone Star State, the state motto of Texas.
Yeah.
And Lonely Star State. It just kind of, I was talking about we need to do something with the state of Texas and Lone Star State or something. He said, "How about Lonely Star State?" And I said, "Boy, that sounds good. Let's go." And so that's how the song got written. I'm not a songwriter. I tried to be, but what I do is I've got a vivid imagination, and I put a lot of stuff, and I write it down, and I send it to him or email it to him and say, "Here's an idea," that kind of thing. So that's where I come into play. I let the experts like
exactly. You let the pros do it.
Yeah, Mark Namore. I'll give you an idea of who he is. He's the guy that wrote "Moon Over Georgia" for Shenandoah. That's who that guy is.
Okay.
So that's my main songwriter right there. He's such a wonderful person.
Man,
he really is. So he's kind of he's kind of my Dean Dillon of Sonny. He's Sonny's Dean Dillon. Yeah.
Well, go check him out. SonnyMorganMusic.com. He's on Facebook under Sonny Morgan Music. The latest single, Lonely Star State, is out now. You're going to hear it right now. Well, Sonny, we'll definitely have to do it again because I didn't even get to 90% of the questions I was going to ask you.
Well, I tell you, I talked to but it's a fun story, and yeah, we need to pick up on part 2.
Exactly. Well, we'll definitely do it again. He's up for 5 ICE Awards, International Singer-Songwriters Awards, coming up this summer. He rescues greyhounds. He's been married for 47 years. He goes and sings to seniors. We got all kinds of stuff to talk about, but we'll definitely do it again. SonnyMorganMusic.com. Well, Sonny, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
Here's Lonely Star State. Sonny Morgan. It's KIX 96.5.